I would like to formally apologize in advance for the audio on this next video. I'm sitting in my stairwell at my house, and I had this little funky, cool balloon chair, and I thought it'd be fun to sit here in my stairwell. And with even having this microphone, this shit echoes through the entire episode. And there was no friggin' way I was going to shoot it again. So I am so sorry. Hopefully I can clean it up in CapCut. And if I can't, I truly apologize for this inconvenience. Have a wonderful day. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to installation 3 of Real Estate Ruckus. Kind of keeping it a little casual tonight. I'm going to tell you guys my least favorite story ever. So I'm curled up with a blanket, and I'm in my comfy chair, and we're going to talk about the worst day of my life. One of the worst days of my life. So to tell this story, I kind of have to tell the entire backstory. So hopefully there's a lot of things that you can learn along the way, because this is quite a unique situation. And I think some investors encounter it most of their careers. Not everybody, if you're lucky enough. But I just wanted to tell this story, and hopefully anybody that has this happen to them down the road can remember my story and remember what to do and what not to do. So I have to start with how I acquired this property. And I want to say 2018. I'll start with real estate is all about who you know. Okay. Most of the things that I have lucked into that have been great for my career have been through people that I know, family, friends, referrals, things like that. So my dad had a standing lunch with some guys from high school, and they were talking about their kids, and my dad mentioned I was in real estate and I invested in real estate. And one of the guys said, "Oh, my aunt has an apartment that she wants to sell." And my dad knew that was my retirement plan. I wanted to work on buying apartments and rentals and multi-units and have a lot of buy and holds that once they're all paid off and I'm in my hopefully 50s, more than likely 60s, that's my retirement plan, passive income. So passed the information along, made the connection, and I met this lady who was lovely, and she had this apartment in Riverside. And I looked at it and I had to have it. From an investor standpoint, this thing was absolutely amazing. There were no common spaces, which came in great because COVID was like the next year or two after that. It was 2 ranch slab brick buildings. There were 5 one-bedrooms and 2 two-bedrooms. Now, I know one-bedrooms aren't typically ideal for investors because the turnover rate seems kind of high, but for what it was, this was perfect. There was a parking lot in the middle, and then there was 2 buildings, one on each side. And there was a 1, 2, 3 one-bedrooms and a 2, and then 1, 2 one-bedrooms, and then another 2, if I'm mathing that correctly. So I got to walk through a couple of the units. One of the ones that she took me through was this man that had been there for, I want to say like 7 or 8 years. And he had been there a very long time. He did not love the fact that she was going to sell the unit. He had paid his rent a year in advance every year because he knew her, trusted her, liked her, and he didn't like the change. And unfortunately, once I started digging into the leases and getting some information about this place, she hadn't raised the rent in 5, 6, 7 years on some of these people. And I try to be a fair landlord, so when I did purchase it, I gave everybody significant notice that, hey, rent is going to go up probably $100, $125, which I know is a big jump, but I gave them like 3 months notice. You can give notice that you're going to leave, but if you want to stay in 3 months, this is going to be your rent rate. So I tried to be fair in what made financial sense to me, but also give them plenty of notice that if they couldn't afford that they could find somewhere else to go. With, I think 3 months is very generous to relocate if that were the case. But everybody stayed because this was, again, a brick ranch apartment building in Riverside, right off across from Overlook Apartments. The lady I bought it from, actually, her and her husband physically built these apartments. She said she remembers with her daughter and her on a little backpack carrier carrying bricks to build this apartment. And I thought, man, what a cool story, what a cool lady. This is great. This will be, a big start of my retirement. So, had a little bit of turnover here and there, not a lot. I had it for about a year before I refinanced it. So I was able to buy it from her on land contract, where I put down X amount of money from her and I made payments for, I believe it was 12 months. I got the rents up so it was more income producing and it was easier for me to refinance into a long-term conventional loan. So if you can find an investor with a buy and hold that's willing to do that, to make a purchase on a multi-unit, that's great, especially if the rents are not where they should be. It gives you time, so you don't have to qualify for the financing immediately. Get your books in order, get the rents in order, get it performing well so the refinance is much easier, which is what I did. And the gentleman that was in that first unit, we're going to call him Mr. Kale, I think. I don't want to use real names, so I'm going to use Mr. Kale because it's similar enough that I probably won't screw that up. So he's in the front one-bedroom unit where the lady behind him was in and out of hospice a lot and was ill, and her apartment was not very clean because of it. And then the lady next to him, she had several cats, and you could tell that there were several cats in that unit. Remember that. That'll come in later. You'll say, oh, okay, that's why. Sorry, I hate this story, but it's a very good story, and I'm trying to tell it well. And talking to the camera by yourself is hard. Nobody's talking back to me, and I'm used to people talking back to me all the time, especially my kids. So, I get the building refinanced into long-term, and it's doing great. The rents it's making money every month. Tenants paid their own utilities because it was all separate metered. COVID happened. That was really nice because we didn't have those common spaces to worry about. This Mr. Kale, this gentleman, I would have to collect his rent in person. So most of the people paid online. I had an online system set up, but he did not want to do that. And he paid his rent 2 months in advance. Remember this as well. That's going to come in later. So he paid his rent 2 months in advance. I would come and pick it up. He would call me when the time would change, so somebody could come over and reset the timers on the automatic lights outside. So he would do that. He was kind of the neighborhood watch. If there was something suspicious going on one of the other units, he would always call and let me know. But he was very gruff. He did not care for me because I bought it, because I raised the rent. I always try to be very nice to him. He was ex-military. His apartment was very clean. He was very organized. I've never seen anything like it. But he just did not care for me at all. And it's funny, my landscaper, he would go over there and he said he'd wave at him and offer him a beer. And when I'd go over there to pick up rent, he'd open the door, stick the check out, and shut the door back. He would just, it just was what it was. So, up to D-Day, the day that this story is actually about, I had his unit lady who had been ill off and on, and then cat lady. Cat lady was having some drainage issues with her toilet and tub. So I go to my investor group and say, hey, who can help me with this? And this young guy who is a plumber said that he could help me. And it was just a couple of hours. He went over there, and it ended up getting dark when he got there, I believe. This was in late March, so it didn't stay light super, super late. So he goes over, he gets her stuff clear. He wanted to check the other units, but the middle lady was not home. She was in the hospital at that time. And he goes over to Mr. Kale's unit and is knocking on the door, and he can't get any response there either. And he said, I really want to check and make sure I haven't just pushed it down the line. I want to make sure this is clear, and somebody else isn't going to be calling tomorrow with an issue. So he said, I'm going to climb on the roof, see if I can get all the way out from there. So he does, and he calls me a couple of times in the process. And then the last time he calls me, he says, there's a problem. Mr. Kale, the front unit, he's in the apartment. He's sitting on the couch. I can see him sitting on the couch. He's not answering me. I'm knocking on the door, and he's just not answering. And I said, well, I know that if it were me knocking on that door, he wouldn't just sit there and ignore me. He would be opening that door and telling me to get the F out of there. And so there's something not right. So I drop what I'm doing, and I head over there. And mind you, it's dark at this point. And let's see, this was end of March. So he had paid rent in February. So he would have been due to pay rent for April, which was coming up in a couple of weeks. As I'm on my way, he calls me again, and he said, it stinks out here. And I thought, ugh. And I kind of knew what to expect here from this, because I felt like the Grim Reaper for a few months that year, because my neighbor across the street had passed away. When I bought this house in Beaver Creek that I was living in at the time, I thought this house was actually vacant. Never saw anybody. The lawn was mowed, but it wasn't like well cared for. The house looked kind of just a little bit like nobody had done any updating in 15, 20 years. It was fine, but it just kind of looked like it was just not being improved at all. And we had went on vacation and come back, and we were gone probably about a week. The kids went back to school that following Monday, and his yard was really getting tall, which was rare. And I will say, I probably lived in that house 3-4 months before I even saw this man outside. And waiting at the school bus stop for the kids to get on the bus, and I turned to my other neighbor who his kids got on the bus with my kids. And when the bus took off, I said, hey, come across the street with me. We're going to go check this mailbox. And we walked across the street, and the mailbox was completely full. And that ended up with us calling the non-emergency number for the police to come out and do a welfare check. And once they got there, there were obvious signs that he had passed away inside, and they had to call in the fire department to force entry. And once you smell that smell, you don't forget that smell. So I digress. I get back to the apartment. I meet him there. It's him. He had called in an assistant of his or a friend of his that was helping him, and myself, and we get there, and I get out of the car and open the door, and that's at least 10 to 15 feet away from the building, and as soon as I get out of the car, I can smell it. And again, once you smell that, you don't forget what it is. So knowing what we're going to happen upon, we're walking up to the apartment, and this is the window that faces the door, or faces the street. The blinds are open, and it is dark in the apartment. So he has no lights on, but the TV is on. It's dark outside. We get up to the window, and since the TV is on, the lighting changes in the room. Well, just as we get to the window, it shifts from like a TV show to a commercial that maybe is very bright and lit, and that switch just illuminated the entire room. And there was Mr. Kale on the couch with a beer still in his hand, and he had been that way for approximately 2 months. I don't know. I'm going to say trigger warning, I guess. If you've made it this far and you're not squeamish, if you are, just skip it. We'll see you in episode 4. I don't know if you guys know, as the human body decomposes, it bloats and doubles in size. Okay, sorry, I used his real name. I had to back out and go back. Anyway. So, TV lights up. I've lost my complete train of thought here. TV lights up the room. There is Mr. Kale on the couch. Unrecognizable, really. Beer still in his hand, and that was the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. Luckily, where I was standing and how the blinds in the window, I didn't see his full face because I think I would have needed serious therapy. But I could only see him from like here down. And like I said, there's just some things you just don't unsee. We called the cops. Police came. They had to obviously call the coroner. I didn't have any emergency contact information. I didn't have anything like that to be able to find his family. The police said that they would contact the VA and try to make contact with the family that way, and for me to call in a day or two to see if they had made contact so I could contact the family. And I did that. Came across his brother, who told me that, well, I had stopped talking to him because he was all up in that depression shit. Which, yeah, clearly he killed himself. So I found that pretty awful. The brother said, you can just take his stuff, it's fine, we don't need to be there, and then called back about 15 minutes later and said, no, we want to be there in case we find money. So that was really nice. He also wanted to get a suit for his funeral, and I just thought, he's in the couch and the carpet. There's not going to be putting him in a suit. And I tried to explain that in a delicate way. But yeah, I thought that was terrible that this veteran who did have family local, nobody knew for 2 months that he had passed away. And I didn't know because he paid rent 2 months in advance. He had paid in February, and he paid in February, and then he didn't know anything until April. So it was not late rent yet. However, we did have a time change, and he didn't call. And I missed that we needed to do that, and that he hadn't called. So trying to figure that timeline out, the police had estimated he had been deceased about 2 months. It was like that scene in the movie Seven. It was absolutely the most horrible thing I'd ever seen. He had taken pills, which he put the pill bottle out on his front stoop so somebody could figure out what had happened to him. Nobody saw that driving by. He liked to drink his Bud Light. One of the neighbors said, well, I thought Mr. Kell had just stopped drinking because there wasn't any beer in the dumpster anymore. We just thought he had quit drinking. Didn't think anything of it. The lady next to him, again, she's in and out. And I explained how the condition of those other 2 apartments, what they were as to why nobody else smelled the decomposition that was going in there. So that's another reason why it got unattended to for that long. The mailbox, the window that we saw him from in the mailbox are like this. The mail was overflowing out of this mailbox, and you could see him on the couch from the window, and the mailman came every day and delivered mail to a man's apartment who would come and get the mail out of the box as soon as that mail was delivered. And for 2 months, they did nothing. And you could see him, you could smell him, they did nothing. And I've talked to people that said, the post office is trying to get away from being like everybody's keeper, babysitter, elderly watch, whatever you want to call it. And isn't that exactly what they should be? If you're visiting a property every single day, shouldn't you be reporting something that looks off? My mind was blown that no call was made by the post office. I had my guy that took care of the landscaping that he liked, that he said he would offer him a beer and wave. They came to shovel snow and were shoveling the walk over by his house, and he said he waved at him and he could see him sitting on the couch and he didn't wave back, and he thought, well, that's kind of weird. And they could smell it, and he said, oh, well, we thought there was a sewer line back up. I have to laugh because this is just kind of an unbelievable story that I feel like, of course, happened to me because I have the craziest shit happen. That's why I'm doing Real Estate Ruckus podcast, because if something crazy is going to happen, it's going to happen to me, or I'm going to be involved, or something, because only the crazy shit happens to me. But that was the story of how I found my tenant passed away. I hate that story because it's terrible. I actually ended up selling that apartment. I couldn't bring myself to go back over there. The day I had to go over and put a lockbox on it for it to be cleaned out, I was physically shaking from seeing what I saw when we found him to go over there. I didn't sleep with the lights off for months after that. Lights were on, or TV was on, or a bathroom light was on. I couldn't sleep in the darkness because it was just so disturbing. We had to do a hazmat cleanup. A company called Aftermath came out, and they have to clean everything porous. They have to remove the furniture, the carpet, and basically do a sterilization of the entire apartment, which is an insurance claim, if you don't know, if you ever run into that situation, which, thank goodness, because that cleanup was about $75,000, which did get paid by the insurance company, thank goodness. But can you imagine? Who would have thought that it would be that expensive? I mean, I know it's an extensive cleanup, but that cost just kind of blew my mind for a one-bedroom apartment. And yeah, I ended up getting the unit turned, never stepped foot back into that apartment, put it on the market after it was all cleaned up, and disclosed that a previous tenant had passed away in there, and I sold it. That was a big part of my retirement plan, and I sold it. Looking back now, do I think that was the right decision? I mean, I cashed out a decent amount of money, but should I have probably thought with my brain and not my eyeballs? Yeah, I probably should have just passed it off to a property manager and let them manage it until I felt like I could be comfortable with it. Because, I mean, now at this point, I think if I found something like that again, I would be way less phased than before. I guess maybe because I've dealt with it before, and in my older age, I feel like death is a little bit more common now that I'm in my late 30s. So yeah, I don't know. If that happened today, I don't know if I would have had that same kind of visceral reaction of not being able to go back over there, and if I would have actually ended up selling it. But maybe going through it is what kind of got me to be a little bit more desensitized to it, and maybe a little bit less traumatic. But yeah, that was a big learning lesson in real estate that not a lot of people encounter, but it happens. There's something on the news. Somebody found a body in a house that was listed for sale. You know, it happens. You kind of just always have to be prepared for the unexpected, I guess, in real estate, which is, again, why we're kind of doing this podcast. So I hope I told that story well. I hope I did it justice. Yeah, that was kind of like takes me back to when that happened. I mean, like I said, I found 2 bodies in the span of like 3 or 4 months. I thought, oh my God, I'm the Grim Reaper. Everybody needs to stay away from me. Like, what's next, you know? Which you never want to ask that ever. But yeah, that was my most traumatizing real estate experience, which led me to abandon plans that I had for a retirement portfolio and run for the hills, and ultimately kind of led me to sell off almost all my rentals because it was like, well, that was a big chunk of the income. I've got a few of these single families. Why am I doing this? So I scrapped them all, sold them all, and now I'm back in rebuild mode. So I've been looking to get back into doing Airbnbs, looking into doing maybe another multi-unit, maybe something that there can be an Airbnb in one and more long-term in the other, kind of keep it diversified a little bit. So I'm past my trauma, and I think I'm ready to get back out there again into the long-term rental, short-term rental, dating world. So I'll be looking for something else to pick up and do something fun and creative with. But I thank you guys for listening to my sad story. And Mr. Kale, he really, really hated me, and he got me real good one last time, being the lucky one to find him. So yeah, that one sucked. So, but thank you for listening, and I hope to have something a little bit more fun and lighthearted on the next episode. And I am trying to do these a little bit more often and try to get on a set weekly schedule to get things posted, but such is life and kids, and I get busy even though I want to do it, and sometimes it just doesn't happen in the schedule that I want it to. So I appreciate you guys hanging in there. I appreciate you listening to the story. Thanks for sitting on my comfy chair with me and my blanket and my coffee, and let me tell you this story about one of the most horrible things that I've ever witnessed in my entire life. So thanks for coming to therapy. We will see you soon. Contact information to follow if you're interested in working with me and buying and selling real estate, or if you have any questions or ideas or suggestions for guests or subjects or anything you guys want to hear about. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, you guys. Take care. Talk soon.